Hello and welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a 384-page government document that, believe it or not, affects just about everything in the state of Odisha. It's called the General Financial Rules of 2023. And look, I know that sounds incredibly dry, but its goal is something we can all get behind, making sure public money is spent wisely.
I mean, just think about it for a second. Every single road that's built, every teacher's salary, every public health program, it's all funded by our money. So what's the system that keeps all of that in check? How does a government make absolutely sure that every rupee is spent transparently and, legally?
Well, for the state of Odisha, this rulebook is the answer. The OGFR is basically the financial operating system for the entire state. It's the master blueprint that dictates how every single department handles public money, from these huge infrastructure projects right down to the paper clips for the office.
Okay, so let's dive in. In this explainer, we're going to break down 5 key parts of the OGFR. We'll start with what it is, the government's rulebook, then we'll get into its core philosophy, the specific rules for spending, how the government actually buys things, and finally, what happens when things go wrong, how it ensures accountability.
So what is this rulebook really for? I mean, if you strip away all the technical jargon, the ultimate goal is actually pretty simple. It's all about good governance and responsible financial management. Now, what's so important here is that this document creates one single, uniform code for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're an officer collecting taxes or one buying new computers. The OGFR gives you the exact procedure to follow. And that creates a system that's predictable, transparent, and most importantly, accountable.
All right. Now, if you had to boil down this entire 384-page document into a single core idea, it would be this one right here, the prudent person principle. It's a remarkably simple and relatable concept that honestly guides every other rule in the book. And there it is. This quote from Rule 24 is the absolute heart of the OGFR. It basically asks every single official to answer one simple question before they spend any public money. Would I spend my own money this way? This one idea, this one humanizing principle is the ultimate litmus test for every government expense. And that core principle breaks down into these 4 standards. First, act with prudence. Treat it like it's your own cash. Second, justify the cost. No extravagance. Don't spend more than you have to. Third, avoid any personal gain. And fourth, make sure there's a real public benefit. No spending to help out a specific person or group. Together, these are the pillars of financial integrity.
So how does this big idea actually translate into the day-to-day rules? If the prudent person principle is the why, then what we're about to see is the how.
One of the key distinctions the rules make, and this is in Rule 108, is between charged and voted spending. Charged expenditures are basically constitutional obligations, things that are non-negotiable. Think salaries for high court judges. These aren't up for debate. They get paid. Voted expenditures, on the other hand, that's everything else. New schools, roads, healthcare schemes, all of that has to be debated and approved by the state legislature.
Here's another interesting rule, one that's really designed for efficiency. It's called the lapse of sanction. It's basically a use it or lose it policy. So if a department gets approval for a project but doesn't actually spend any money on it within 12 months, that approval just expires. This stops funds from being tied up forever and hopefully keeps projects moving along.
Okay, so we've got the principles and some of the rules for spending, but what about when the government actually needs to buy stuff? Anything from paper clips to power plants. Well, this is called procurement, and it has its own very detailed set of rules.
As you can probably guess, the core philosophy here is exactly the same. Rule 204 lays it out plain and simple. All government purchases have to be made in a way that is transparent, competitive, and fair. The goal isn't just to buy something. It's to get the absolute best value for every single taxpayer rupee. So, the government has a few different ways of buying things, and it really depends on the scale and urgency. For the big-ticket items, anything over 25 lakh rupees, the default is an advertised tender. That's a public call for bids to get as much competition as possible. For smaller purchases or in emergencies, they can use a limited tender and just invite bids from a trusted list of suppliers. And only in really rare cases, like say, a product only has one manufacturer, can they use a single tender, and even then, it requires some serious justification.
Now, once that bidder is selected, the contract itself becomes this critical tool for protecting public money. Rule 289 makes it really clear that a government contract isn't just a commercial deal, it's a public trust document. It has to include specific clauses that are designed to safeguard the government's and, by extension, the public's interest.
And here are just a few examples of those safeguards. Contracts have to include liquidated damages, which basically means the contractor pays a penalty if there are delays. There are limits on how much the price can change. There's a force majeure clause for truly unforeseeable events like a natural disaster. And crucially, there are clear terms for ending the contract if the contractor doesn't perform, and a way to resolve any disputes. It's all about building a legal safety net.
Okay, so we've seen the principles, we've seen the procedures. But what happens if, despite all of these rules, something does go wrong? Well, our final section here looks at the mechanisms for accountability.
And the rules are incredibly strict on this. Rule 47 says that any loss of public money or property, it doesn't matter what the cause was or how it was found, it has to be reported to the next higher authority immediately. There's absolutely no sweeping things under the rug.
But, the rules are also practical. For what they call petty losses, that's anything under this amount, 10,000 rupees, a full formal report to the Accountant General isn't required. And this is really just to stop auditors from drowning in paperwork over small things so they can focus on the most significant issues.
The whole reporting process is very systematic. The second a loss is even suspected, an initial report gets filed. That just gets the ball rolling. Then, after a full investigation, a final, much more detailed report is submitted. And this final report has to explain everything: the nature of the loss, how big it was, why it happened, and very importantly, what the chances are of getting the money back.
And here it is. This is the ultimate backstop. Rule 51 makes it crystal clear. Accountability is personal. An officer can be held personally responsible for any loss that was caused by their own fraud or their own negligence. This really elevates the job from just a task to a direct personal duty. So, the Odisha General Financial Rules lay out this incredibly comprehensive framework for managing public money. But it does leave us with a bigger question, right? A detailed rulebook is essential, but is it enough? What roles does culture, ethics, and just the simple will to follow these rules play in truly building public trust? That's all for this edition of The Explainer. Thanks so much for joining us.